Hey, first of all, I want to welcome you to this tutorial. If you are here, you probably want to know the secrets of how to prep your own characters for printing. It takes some time to properly prepare characters, but hopefully this tutorial will help you, and I'm pretty sure you will find this process very relaxing and easy with some practice. I will divide this series of lessons in 4 different parts. First, I'll talk about my own setup, what kind of printer I have, go through some other printers and take a look at what's the difference between resin and filament printers, and maybe help you to choose your own printer if you are looking to buy one. I'm not going too technical on this, so I'm just really going to touch on the surface of this matter. Second, I'll introduce you to the printing software that I've been using lately, which is Ultimaker Cura, and go through some of the basics of how to navigate around the software and talk about the most important settings you should consider when printing your own characters. Third, I will show you the process of prepping very simple objects to print. Knowing the basics is the most important step in this tutorial, so I will talk about what kind of problems you will definitely encounter throughout this process. And for last, I will take the character I've created on my last tutorial and prep it for printing. So let's get started and let's talk about my own setup. Just a quick disclaimer, this tutorial is not sponsored by any of the manufacturers that I'm going to mention. Everything I will say about my printer comes from my own experience using it, and all the others comes from a deep research I did in order to focus only on some of the best reviewed and affordable printers on the market. So, the printer I have is Anycubic i3 Mega. It's an FDM printer. FDM stands for Fused Deposition Modeling, and it uses plastic filament to print. And this is what filament looks like. There are a lot of different FDM materials, but the one I use is called PLA+, which is this one right here. There are many colors you can choose from, but I really just use this gray filament. I'm not a fan of any other color, just because most of them are pretty shining and very distracting if you are trying to look for small details. So yeah, this is the one I usually use most of the time. I also tried this skin color, but I'm not really a fan of any of this except the gray color. So back to FDM materials, the most common are ABS and PLA. PLA Plus is pretty much the same as PLA, but the surface quality is just a little bit better. Also, PLA or PLA Plus is recommended for printing objects with more details, so it's a more moldable material. ABS is more rigid and recommended for printing something that needs to be more stable or stronger. So this filament goes through this white cable and this extruder that is very hot and melts the plastic to a level that is very moldable. So the extruder starts to draw the object on this build plate layer by layer, starting from the bottom. The extruder has the ability to move on 2 axes, side to side and up and down, but because of how printers work, the extruder will move on the z-axis from bottom to top when it's printing, and not the opposite. So the extruder can't really go back to the layer underneath to finish some detail. And for last, this build plate moves front to back, and that's how filament printers work on all 3 axes. Resin printers, however, use liquid resin to print objects. These types of printers also build up the print layer by layer, just like FDM printers, but instead of using a string of solid filament that will go through a hot extruder to melt, it uses a UV laser or a light source to solidify the liquid resin. First, you will start by filling this tray with uncured liquid resin. The platform where the print will be built lowers down until it's soaked in the resin. Then it will start to rise very slowly while the UV laser or the light source solidifies the resin. So visually, resin printers build the print from top to bottom, opposite to filament printers that start from the bottom. So what is the biggest difference between these two types of printers, and why did I go for an FDM printer? The biggest difference is surface quality. If you want to print very detailed characters, you should always go for a resin printer. Most common types of printers you will find are SLA, MSLA, DLP, and LCD printers. And although these are all resin printers, the way they work is different from each other. So SLA printers like the Form 3 or the Moai, these use a single UV laser that cures the resin, and it's more accurate than all the rest of resin printers. These are usually more expensive than others that use different technology. So if you are looking to buy a Formlabs printer, which are among the best printers in the world, prepare your wallet because their prices are pretty high. But if you want something more affordable, you should keep your eye on printers that use different technology, like the Anycubic Photon S and the Elegoo Mars. These are LCD printers, so they use a small LCD screen to project the light that is going to solidify the resin. And also the SparkMaker FHD, which is an MSLA printer. These three printers are some of the best reviewed and affordable resin printers on the market, so you will be more than satisfied with the results you will get from any of these printers. And if you visit SparkMaker's website, you can see how they compare these two prints. So this one was printed on their SparkMaker FHD, and this one was printed on a Form 2. It's very impressive the amount of detail you will get from a $300 printer compared to the Form 2, which costs around $3,000. Let's also take a look on how FDM prints looks like when compared with resin prints. And here it's a lot easier to see the difference. The amount of detail you can get from a resin printer is a lot higher than what you can get from an FDM printer. So if you are really looking for detail and you are more interested in printing small figures, don't think twice and go for a resin printer. Now let's talk about resin really quickly, and this is very important if you are interested in buying a resin printer. Not only resin is more expensive than filament. These days, resin is cheaper than it was like 2 years ago, but it's still more expensive than filament. So printing larger objects on a resin printer will be more expensive than printing the same object on a filament printer. Also, resin is very, very toxic. When it's cured, you are free to touch it, but before that, you need to wear gloves. The process of cleaning up a resin print is much more complex than filament. Resin needs to be washed and cured once it's done printing, but touching a resin print that is not yet washed and cured is very, very dangerous. Companies like Prusa and Formlabs sell these washing and curing machines, and these machines simplify the process of cleaning up resin prints, but you still need to be very careful because at some point you have to move the print from one machine to the other. One last thing is that while it's printing, resin printers create lots of toxic fumes. So you want to have the printer working on a ventilated room so you don't breathe all that toxic stuff. And this is the biggest reason I'm not really interested in buying a resin printer for now. Even when these are dropping the prices very quickly, I'll probably wait 2 or 3 years until resin becomes a more eco-friendly product. And if you are also on the same page as me, you should know that Anycubic is actually selling plant-based resin that is said to be more safe and doesn't smell as bad as regular resin. I'm not really sure how eco-friendly this is, but this seems to be a very good start for those who are looking for a more sustainable and clean world. From my part, I'll most definitely wait a couple of years before this becomes a standard from most of the manufacturers. Let's go back to FDM printers. So just want to show you something on my Instagram. And when I first started printing my characters, they turned out pretty bad. This is one of my very first prints, and although I can do better today with some more tweaking on the printing software, this turned out pretty bad for many reasons. First, the layer height was set to 0.2 millimeters. This is a setting that controls the thickness of each layer, so the lower the thickness, the more quality you will get. Also, I didn't slice this character properly. I actually just dynaMeshed it entirely and imported it to the printing software and printed just like that. So I can totally get much better results by lowering the layer height and cut the character in more different parts, so the printer will be able to catch some more detail. And another model I want to show you is this boot right here, and this is something that turned out pretty good. It took me 8 hours to print this object. The layer height was set to 0.1 millimeters and the print speed to 25 millimeters per second. And yeah, I was very happy with the results, so I printed the rest of the character with the same settings, but in some areas like the face, I dropped the speed to 10 millimeters per second, so I could get some more details out of the 3D model. So yeah, this is my tallest print so far. It's around 40 centimeters and it turned out pretty good. And this is the reason I like FDM printers. Because filament is cheaper, you can just go crazy and print gigantic figures without investing a lot of money on material. This is my latest print. I was able to print this guy in under 12 hours. I haven't printed anything this small for some time. It's an 8 centimeters tall figure and I'm quite happy with the results. I'm actually using the skin color filament, but I'm not really a fan of any color except the gray filament. But I really wanted to try this one. Printing this figure on a resin printer would give me a lot better surface quality, but again, I'm not really interested in printing small figures, but it was just great to see the amount of detail I could get from a small filament print. To sum up, here are the pros and cons of each type of printer. Resin printers have a much better surface quality and are great to print miniatures, and the quality is better as you keep printing larger objects. The con here is that resin is more expensive, which doesn't make large resin prints very affordable. Filament, however, is not great for printing small objects, and the detail here is very limited, but you'll manage to print very nice and tall figures by keeping it very low cost. Back to resin. Uncured resin is very toxic, which makes the cleanup process a bit more complex. With filament printers, you just have to wait for everything to cool down, and you remove the print with your bare hands, and that's it. Overall, resin printers are more expensive, but with price cuts and discounts, both types of printers are getting much cheaper and affordable, so that's a very good thing for both of them. So if you ask me, I will say that choosing a printer depends on what size you want to print your characters and how detailed you want your prints to be. On one hand, resin printers are perfect for miniatures, or if you want to print something like same size of amiibos or Skylanders figures. You can still print large figures, but you'll have to invest a lot of money on resin. On the other hand, filament is much cheaper, so printing large figures is affordable. For printing small objects, I can't really recommend it. So that's my take on filament and resin printers. Let's move on to the next lesson and let's talk about the printing software I use.